Hi, everyone. Welcome to Breaking the Silence, a podcast hosted by Angels Protection, Inc., where we amplify the voices in young mothers and women and the advocates working to ensure they receive the care, dignity, and justice that they deserve. I'm your host, Makaila Davis, founder and chairwoman of Angels Protection, Inc., and I'm also a 2025 to 2026 visiting scholar with the Health Policy and Media Fellowship at the George Washington University School of Nursing. In this episode of our series, we're focusing on a topic that nearly does not get enough attention: short-term suicide risk in Black, Indigenous, and people of color adolescent mothers. At Angels Protection Inc., we see firsthand how many young mothers are navigating unimaginable stress, from mental health stigma and partner violence to housing insecurity and systematic neglect, all while raising a child and trying to survive. This series is about listening, learning, and pushing for change. And today's guest is a perfect person to help us start this conversation. Dr. Brianna A. Baker is a psychologist, researcher, and an implementation science fellow at the City University of New York Center for Innovation and Mental Health. A graduate from Columbia University, her work focuses on promoting mental health equity for Black women, girls, and families from trauma-informed, community-based interventions. Dr. Baker's research examines Black maternal health, intergenerational trauma, and the use of movement exercise as pathways to emotional healing, which is very needed within our community. She's the founder of Girls Researching Optimal Wellness, G.R.O.W, a school-based program designed to support the mental wellness of BIPOC adolescent girls through identity exploration and holistic wellness practices. Her scholarship has been published in Springer and Psychology of Women Quarterly, and she's an affiliated researcher with Stanford Medicine Sports Equity Lab. Through her work, Dr. Baker aims to bridge psychology, public health, and social justice to create equitable systems of care for minority women and families. Dr. Brianna A. Baker brings a deep insight to today's conversation, and we are honored to welcome her to the podcast. So I just want to say thank you so much for being a part of this today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's like, again, you reading it, we prepped it, but still, it's like, whoa. So thanks for having me.
No, it's such a blessing. And to kind of just like kick it off, I wanted to ask you, so Dr. Baker, your work bridges psychology, public health, and social justice. So how did your journey into this field begin, and what personal professional experiences shaped your passion for promoting mental health equity for Black women and girls?
Oh my goodness, what a great question to start this out with. I live in New York now. I feel like a lot of people see me online as very much a city girl, but I'm actually from rural North Carolina, and that's where I spent, majority of my life from 0 to 24. So growing up in a very rural area in the South, I was very much in a homogeneously white community, conservative community. Um, I didn't have Black classmates, didn't have Black teachers, like those, I just, they weren't there where I grew up. And I think that led to a lot of like isolation, a lot of feelings of like, why isn't my hair like this? People would make fun of me, for my skin color. They would say that I look like I'm related to the janitor. There's like things that growing up, and I just had to laugh it off, but it was like, man, like, this really does hurt. And I remember in middle school going through what I now would call, childhood depression, but just this feeling of like worthlessness and hopelessness and not wanting to look in the mirror. And, once I got to high school, like saying that I didn't care about prom. And it wasn't that I didn't care, but it was because none of those white boys were going to ask me, So I was like very much, I think aware of like my racial and gender identity from a young age because it stuck out in the context that I was in. I would say the thing that, led me to psychology was I think I'm just deeply a psychological person. I think you'll find that in a lot of psychology programs. Like we think in a way that's very like intrapsychic. So it's kind of like, all right, I have that going for me. But I remember it was 2 or 3 days before I graduated high school. Khalif Browder died by suicide. And I mean, listeners don't know who Khalif Browder is. He was a teenager, a Black teenager who was um, thrown into Rikers Island jail prison facility for allegedly stealing a backpack. And he was kept there for about 3 years, with the majority of that time being in solitary confinement. Eventually, he gets released from Rikers Island, but all of the mental health issues that followed were like it was super challenging for him, and he ended up dying by suicide. And I remember this happening, a few days before I graduated high school, and I was just like, what a thought, like to rather die than to live the Black experience in America. Like it was definitely a turning point for me. And I was like, I want to study this. I want to study not just, suicide and depression, but I want to study healing and joy because I don't want this to happen to our communities. So that's a big reason of what kind of got me into psychology. And then there's all the blah, blah, blah academic stuff that happened, which is, great. But I think I always come back to my upbringing and Khalif Browder.
No, definitely. And I really like how you touched on the Black experience within America. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's unfortunate that this is a part of our experience.
Yes.
But I love how you tied in your experiences as a youth and then brought that into now in adulthood. Okay, how am I, what am I going to school for? Why am I doing it? And
Yeah.
what do I want to see as my career so I can be a part of that change? Um,
Right.
and that's
Right.
what you're continuously doing every single day, and showing up and representing.
Yeah. Thank you.
No, I appreciate you for the work that you do. Um, and then even like to touch on too, like you founded Girls Reaching Optimal Wellness Grow. Can you share a little bit about that? What inspired the initiative and how it addresses the intersection of identity, trauma, and wellness among BIPOC adolescent girls?
Yes, absolutely. So, the story with Khalif Browder is definitely what got me into psychology. But as I went through, my schooling through undergrad and eventually through getting my PhD, I did begin to focus more on women and girls because one, research is research, right? So it's like, okay, my experience of growing up as a little Black girl, but also, there's a dearth of research that exists with Black women and girls in general in psychological literature. It's just not there. I lean more so on like Patricia Hill Collins, for example, Black feminist thought, or the media to like learn about Black girlhood. But when it comes to scientific literature, there's not that much out there. So I knew I was like, okay, I want to focus on Black women and girls because we're in such a unique, like, socio-demographic position within, and I focus mainly in the US, so within the United States, but also globally. So after undergrad, I had the time of my life. I was a public health analyst at RTI International, which is like a large public health and science organization. It's headquartered in North Carolina. And part of my job as a public health analyst was to go around the country, collect data. As a 22-year-old, I got to just like use the company card and fly around the country and collect data of all of these different community-based organizations that were being funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and specifically a initiative called Forward Promise, which was meant to a framework that they developed. It was meant to help boys and young men of color thrive, heal, grow, thrive is what they would say. And so it was so cool getting to travel and see how that construct was being implemented with boys and young men of color. It was like going into sweatshops. It was going into a fatherhood program in Indiana. It was an anti-violence program in Philadelphia. Like it was just so cool to see that. And then I was like, where are the girls at? I was like, this is so cool, but like, what are we doing for our girls? And I was like, from that moment on, I was like, I want to do this, but I want to do it for girls. And so in the summer of 2021, I'm very fortunate that my dad is an educator and he's retired now, but at the time he was an assistant principal at a middle school. I was like, Dad, I want to implement a program here in the middle of rural North Carolina. I want to get a group of young women of color and I want to teach them about their racial identity. I want to teach them about self-esteem. I want to build up their worth so that when they go back to school in August, they have some type of psychological armor and protection that can really help because I know how nasty it can be growing up in that environment. And so that's what I did. I founded Girls Reaching Optimal Wellness. It was about an 8-week program. We lived in Elon, North Carolina, but some of the students had never seen a college campus before. How do you not see a college campus when you're literally in a college town? So
Mm.
it really like highlighted some of the disparities too, and just, access. Took them to a college campus. They got to do a tour. They got to see a dorm room for the first time. They got to, write posters showing like their face and the mask they put on and who they want to be. Like it was a very I think it was a very transformative program, not just for the girls, but for myself as well. And so I just want to continue doing that, and I hopefully scale it one day so that it can be implemented around the country.
No, that's amazing. And then also like you touching on the disparities, living in a college town but not seeing a college campus, not having access, and then and then it steps back even further. Okay, their parents probably didn't have the access to
Right,
have
right,
those tools, and then the grandparents. So then it just trickled down to their generation. But then you seeing that gap, being having the privilege to be in that role as a senior analyst and gathering the data and saying, well, where are the programs for the young women?
right,
They
exactly.
need,
Like
we
what?
need that as well. It's seriously, we need that as well too,
Yeah,
so that they can push along in their careers and that they could want to take on leadership roles because we need more of them taking on those roles in leadership. Um, so, really being that change maker and bridging that gap is like I commend that to because it's hard
thank you. Yeah.
putting
It is
together.
hard, and you say, okay, I want to put on a group for just young women of color and girls, of color in a rural white school district. They're like, whoa, 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 wait a minute. And it's only because I had access to power via my dad that I was able to even bypass that initial structural barrier. So it's insane to me, how difficult it is to support young women and girls of color, and specifically Black girls.
No, definitely, especially like you said, if you do not have a connection,
Yeah,
if you do not have a connection, it's going to be very tough to navigate those type of spaces because a lot of times they don't want to support it.
right,
Yeah,
right.
or it's to them it's okay, we don't want to support it, but we don't feel like it's needed. Like,
Exactly,
do we
exactly.
really need that here right now for them? I think they're okay,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not. So
Right.
it's important that we're when we do see a gap that we're being that change maker, and you did that, um, which is very
Yeah.
commendable because it's hard to even if you have a connection, like to still say, I'm going to do it, and then
Right.
previously having your own experiences, and seeing that, I need these young women to have an amazing skill set, a toolbox when they start school
Exactly.
so that they will be okay because it's going to be a lot of challenges
Yeah.
as you're navigating that. Even like as you said, with you were talking about before prom,
Yeah.
and because knowing that they were not going to ask you, so it's sad that even having that experience is traumatic because prom, as we know in our culture, is this big celebration coming to an end,
Exactly.
and coming to an end and coming to a new,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's kind of like stripped and taken away from you in a sense.
Right. Yeah. I had, my most of my friends at the time, I mean, they were white because that's, who I was around. And so it was like they would go to prom from freshman year all the way to senior year. They always had someone wanting to take them out, wanting to go. And not saying that you need a date, right, to go to prom, but that's kind of the culture, especially in the South, right, to have a date take you to prom. That's very, that's what is expected. And so I was embarrassed by the fact that that wouldn't be my story. So I had to pretend like, okay, I don't care anyway. Who wants to get all dressed up? But if you know me, I like getting dressed up. So
Right.
it's like this yeah, it was very incongruent, but I think that awareness of and how to navigate it without or in a way that would minimize that embarrassment is it's really sad if you think about it, like you said.
Yeah, and I think that's what like that experience right there. That's a part of your journey.
Yeah, for
What's
sure.
and that's the towards the end, like the accumulation of your story, like where you are now, because your story is still forming, but where
Yes,
you
very
are,
much.
yeah, and it's rapid. Like if you guys know, if you see her on LinkedIn, she is doing amazing
Oh,
work.
thank
It's
you.
just crazy. Um, and it's just to say like all those experiences have pushed you more to be a stronger leader in the field. And now in psychology, because there's even disparities there of psychologists.
Oh, yes.
So, those childhood experiences that we have that forms us into great and better thriving adults for the
Right.
community that we serve.
Exactly.
So, turning that pain into purpose. And it's what happened. And then you were able to now give these young girls a toolbox so they don't have to have that same experience. So we can come
Right, right. Yeah.
with a better one.
Yeah, exactly.
So also to kind of like touch into most of your research, it focuses on trauma-informed community-based interventions. So what does trauma-informed care look like in your practice for young mothers, especially those that have experienced systematic neglect or violence?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, great question. I keep saying great question after
Yeah.
everything. 'Cause I'm like, this is all about me and the stuff that I like. So of course I'm like, great question. Um, so yeah, let me explain a little bit of the work that I do now. So I graduated in May, which is crazy to me. I feel like I've graduated longer. I think that's just how rapidly things have been, going. But in May, I graduated with my PhD in counseling psychology, and I'm doing what's called a postdoctoral fellowship. It's a year or two to get more research experience, get my research off the ground and to really become that research leader that I want to be. And so I'm at the CUNY School of Public Health and Health Policy. And within that, I'm in the Center for Innovation and Mental Health. Something that we are doing is called task sharing, and it is a public health kind of principle or framework that's basically why don't we give the training and the tools to people who are on the ground, who have boots on the ground, like community-based organization staff, people who are working in homeless shelters, people who are working in schools as teachers. Why don't we give them the tools to be able to assess for mental health challenges and to offer basic counseling so that we can bridge the gap in care and access. So basically, what we did was we developed a 6-week curriculum. It's an intervention that it's about 4 to 6 sessions, and it's all centered around stress management skills. We have like coping and mindfulness, behavioral activation, goal setting, healthy relationships, setting boundaries. Those are some of the different components of the intervention. And what I do is I get to go around New York City and train people who otherwise wouldn't get exposure to any type of clinical training or mental health psychoeducation. I get to train them on how to deliver these stress management sessions to their clientele, so the people who are walking in their doors. I think for me, that is such a basis of trauma-informed care because we are using the supports that are already in the community. We are meeting mothers, families, children and adults where they are, right? We're not saying, hey, why don't you come to the clinic at this time? We're saying, hey, there's people at the places that you frequent who are going to be able to help you now for free, right? Like this is not, this doesn't cost anything. But what we do is we do train and we implement our curriculum into different community-based organizations. So the trauma-informed part, I think, is twofold. I would say one, it's in the way that I train. So when I train these like paraprofessionals or community-based staff in mental health intervention and curricula, it's all about, understanding yourself within a system, understanding the people you serve within a system, and using the compassion that most of these people already have to be able to channel that into an intervention and a way that's a structured way of helping these folks get the care that they need. The other part of it being trauma informed is the fact that we are on the ground and we're not, we're kind of breaking the mold of saying, yeah, you have to come to a certain place at a certain time and do this XYZ. And we're saying, just show up, just be you. And we are going to help you as best as we can through something that's evidence-based and, scientifically founded. So I think those are some of the ways that we're helping. So we see adults, we see children and families. So it's been quite a journey.
No, that's amazing. And then I like how you said you were working with like the paraprofessionals and other community-based staff, um, and really kind of like, in a sense, I guess, taking them under your wing so they understand um, more holistic interventions that they can use in the process.
Exactly. Yeah. Because a lot of these people, I mean, they're tasked with offering support and empathy and counseling anyways, right? Like you have someone coming into a homeless shelter, they're most likely coming with a lot of trauma. So community-based staff are used to, dealing with this level of trauma and, emotions, but they don't have, that structured training necessarily to deal with it in the most effective way. So that's all that we're doing.
No, that's amazing. And then like also kind of I guess tying to as well, how does that intergenerational trauma influence mental health outcomes for Black mothers and their children? And what steps can communities take to begin breaking that cycle?
Oh my goodness. I mean, it's so much. So I study Black matrescence, which is, something that I coined because it really explains the transition into motherhood for Black women, what it means to become a mother in current and historical socio-political contexts. And basically, matrescence was something that was already talked about. Matrescence is like adolescence, it's a life stage, but it's a life stage that we say, social scientists say, I guess you could say, for becoming a mother. So Black matrescence is saying, okay, yes, there is a life stage of becoming a mother, but what does that mean specifically for Black women and the stressors that we face? So for Black women, we have broken it down. My team and I, we try to create a model of, what it means to become a Black mother in current times. There are structural factors that influence becoming a mother. So there are things like access to care, both like perinatal care, but also mental health care, healthcare in general for a mother that just don't have. You can't trust that when you go to a hospital to give birth, you're going to come out alive. You just can't trust that. We know that Black women experience maternal mortality at higher rates than other groups, right? So there are the structural things that exist, access and gaps in care. There's a relational domain. So we know that a healthy pregnancy, healthy motherhood usually is one that's supported by, social supports, family being a huge one. So your relationship with your partner, meaning either, the partner that was involved in conception or not. And then also like family members, do you have that family support or are you being shamed or rejected? Do you have people to go to take you to appointments to help with childcare or not? Do you have friends, who have gone through similar things or not? Those are some of the relational things. There's also a psychology or a psychological domain, an interpersonal domain, which is some mothers, they're going to experience, shame and regret and sadness. Really thinking about mental health in this domain, but there's a lot socially that is put on Black mothers as far as stereotypes, being an angry Black woman or angry Black mother, being a welfare queen, right? And having to rely on the system to take care of your kids, not having a father figure in the home. Like, and these don't apply to all Black women, but I think all Black women are aware of these stereotypes in some way or another, and it influences how we experience pregnancy and motherhood. So these are some of the things that all go into when a Black woman is becoming a mother. And these are all things that can lead to trauma. And so that influences the family system because if you're giving birth under the conditions of, say, I don't have any family around, I'm feeling ashamed, I didn't have adequate health care, my doctor didn't ask me about postpartum depression or anxiety, didn't even know what that was, I didn't have a doula. Like, when you give birth and you're tasked with taking care of a child, you can imagine the stress that's going to be, transferred to that child just by means of, having to survive in a world that is extremely challenging and difficult. So it's a lot. It's definitely a lot. And I know that, we've been talking about adolescent mothers. It's then you have age, race, and gender all together, right? For adolescent mothers. Like at that point, it's identity struggles. You're going through adolescence and matrescence at the same time. A lot of times, unfortunately, for Black adolescent mothers, they report higher histories of family violence, sexual violence and abuse, coercive sex or non-consensual sex. So those are all things that are going to influence, their pathway into motherhood. So if you're going into motherhood already, with a history of abuse and violence, it's extremely mentally and physically and socially challenging to raise a child.
No, it is. And it was a lot that we just you unpacked right here. Um,
Yeah.
no, but it was needed to be said.
Yeah.
And when it comes to especially like you said with adolescent young mothers, when it comes to also sexual, which we don't talk about a lot,
Mhm.
we put on the back burner. It's important that we're talking about safe sex. Because a
Yeah.
lot of that has been taken out of the school, so and it's been placed on parents, and then parents don't want to talk about it with their children, and then you're wondering why she's 15 and she's pregnant with twins.
Okay.
So, yeah, and everybody's like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe what just happened." Yeah, because there's a gap of education that's not being
Right.
taught,
Right.
or things are very taboo. We don't talk
Hmm.
about that. We're not going to do that. No, we need to talk about those things because
Exactly.
it's preventative measures when we talk about it,
Right. Right. Exactly.
which is really critical for I feel like within our community that we need to start. pushing forward that way, and that it's okay if you need to reach out for help
Yeah.
mentally. If you need to gain a therapist, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, it's okay to reach out for support. Um, so like also
Mhm.
too, you've explored the role of movement and exercise, like as pathways to emotional healing. So could you explain like how that those embodied practices like movement, yoga, or mindfulness can support suicide prevention and emotional regulation in young mothers?
Oh my goodness. Yes. I keep saying that after every question because I'm just like, ah. I'm someone who it's interesting. I never really called myself like an athlete, growing up, even though I was always involved in sports. I guess it just maybe it wasn't central to my identity. But once I got older and it was gone, I realized that it was gone and I was like, okay, I need a way to connect with my body. I think sports and movement, it really is there's so much of trauma, there's so much of our identities that is embodied. And what it means is like, our bodies have a way of holding on to trauma, holding on to hurt and pain, and also holding on to healing mechanisms. And I think that's where like, movement plays a huge role. So I started running in high school. I would say I was a track athlete in high school, and I was really, really, really bad. I was so bad at it. So my track coach was like, you're doing all these sprints, but you're not out of breath at the end and you're also coming in last. So why don't you try to like, run for longer and maybe you'll find your niche there. And instead of listening to her, I just quit altogether. It wasn't until graduate school that I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to go for a run. It's COVID. There's not much else to do, so let me go outside. And that really transformed my life for the better. Um, Now, running like multiple marathons, half marathons, like it has just become really a way of life for me. And so I could realize how much it impacted my mental health. And I was like, oh, this needs to be in interventions as well. People don't get out and move as much as we think they do. A lot of movement is forced. So I think a part of what I am really a proponent of is mindful movement, especially for Black women who aren't always in touch with their bodies in a way that is healthy, in a way that is, psychologically beneficial. I think when you're in touch with your body, when you are proud of your body, it really ups your self-esteem. It gets you excited about life. It makes you feel more it increases your self-efficacy as well, I would say. So for Black women and for Black mothers in particular, whose bodies have been taxed either by giving birth or by caring for children or by just sheer work and just existing in this world, mindful movement, gentle movement, movement that feels good is so important for those psychological pathways to build self-esteem.
No, I love that. And like you said, like those personal experiences that you had, and most folks are not moving.
No.
It is very forced. It's like, okay, well, maybe if my friend texts me, I'll go to the gym. But other than that, like I'm not going to go.
Right.
Or, like you said, to touch on back again to like your personal experience and during COVID, that was a really um I'll say transformational time for everyone.
To put it lightly, yeah,
Yeah.
transformational.
Um, and you had that experience of let me just go for a run.
Right,
And
right.
that turned into like marathons and just, pushing yourself further.
Yeah.
Love how like you really like incorporate that like into that. That is beautiful. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other thing is, I went for a run because I'm physically able to. And I feel like one thing I stress is that, movement doesn't have to be a run. That's actually, that's pretty up here. Like we can start down here. We can start by just touching our toes. When's the last time you just went down and looked at your toes, right? So it's kind of like just feeling the different parts of your body, getting back in touch with your body, waking up and stretching instead of waking up and scrolling or, getting up and going and making breakfast immediately, right? It's embodied practice. It's really going to build a relationship with yourself that's healthy. So I think that there's levels to it. If you want to run marathons, I would be so happy for you. But also, if you just wake up and you touch the sky and you touch your toes, like that is just as meaningful.
no, definitely. And like you said, like when was the last time that you looked at your toes? Most people are like, oh, I don't know. Like, yeah,
Right, right,
just,
exactly. Like,
just those little things.
yeah,
And having a routine too, I think.
absolutely.
So also too, like when we talk about suicide risk in BIPOC adolescent mothers, what are some of the most overlooked warning signs or contributing factors that practitioners and community advocates should be aware of?
Well, for practitioners, I don't think we actually ask about suicide, about so really we're looking at depression and anxiety. There's something called PMADS, so perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, PMADS, that we should be screening for. And should be screening for, I would say, people argue like what is the postpartum period? What is the prepartum period? Postpartum, I really think it's anywhere up to 5 years after the child is born because those are the years where you are most vulnerable as a mother, as a caregiver. So being able to go to your primary care doctor, go to your OBGYN, go to your mental health provider, and they screen for PMADS is going to be super important, but we don't do it. It's not embedded. It's like a if you know, you know, as a practitioner. But otherwise, it's something that's extremely overlooked. I think there's a statistic that it's like Latino women, they are 3 times less likely to be screened for PMADS for whatever reason, right? Black women, Indigenous women as well are less likely to be screened for these things. So from a practitioner side, it's like, okay, we have to screen. That is the first thing. Depression and anxiety are going to be your biggest indicators for suicide for Black mothers and Black adolescent mothers. However, a lot of people don't know what that looks like and they're not getting the formalized screening for it. So some things that you can look out for is you're just looking to see, is this woman supported? You know, does she have family support? So a lot of adolescent mothers, Black adolescent mothers, they report not having that family support. There's a lot of shame in getting pregnant when you're a teenager. So a lot of families are like, oh, here we go again, or what did you do now? Like it's a very punitive stance in having a child. So not only is that girl having to deal with actual pregnancy, that's attacks on her body and her mind, and she's having to deal with isolation and rejection from family, friends, and peers. So one of the biggest things we can look at is her support system actually supporting her or is it failing and challenging her? That's a huge thing. Also the conditions of the pregnancy, right? Anytime there's a teen pregnancy, there's a lot of risk involved psychologically and socially or relationally, I should say. But just like I said before, there's a lot of coercive sex, a lot of non-consensual sex that happens, histories of abuse. So we want to be paying attention to those things as well, because that all heightens the risk then for experiencing depression or having suicidal ideation and thoughts as well. Some concrete things that we can look for is sudden onset of insomnia is a really big indicator. So seeing, is she sleeping well or is she up at all hours of the night? Does she feel distant and despondent? Does she have joy in taking care of her child or does it feel like this feels burdensome and overwhelming? Those are some things you can look for as well. Does she seem sad? I mean, I know this is like basic, right? But it's like, is she okay? Like, is she sad? Is she, you know, um, the same as she was before the pregnancy in terms of mood? Or do you notice a shift and has that shift been going on for, months, right? Those are some things that we can look at as far as suicide risk. I think one of the hardest things about suicide risk is that it is still, as much research as we have out there, it's still unpredictable. You know, you can say, oh no, she was very happy. I had no idea. And then it happens, and you're like, wait, how? How? I think the most important thing is, checking in with that youth, with that young mother, constantly asking how they're doing, and then also doing for them, helping out where you can if you're able.
No, definitely. And I think like to touch on too, like you said, like some of these things seem so basic,
Yeah.
not. Because
Yeah.
these are things that she's dealing with every single day. And maybe
Exactly.
touch on like what you said before, what type of mother are you? I think
Yeah.
that is the big question because mom is such a it's a broad title, but there's so many different types of mothers on how they navigate motherhood.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
are you a mother that's making six figures, right? Are you a mom
Okay.
that, are you a mom that is on welfare? They both have the title mom, but their lifestyles are completely different. And
Extremely different. Yeah.
one mother is on Medicaid, right? The other mother has a healthcare plan that is very nice through her corporate job,
Right, right.
right? So, and she doesn't have to worry about, okay, well, is the government going to cut Medicaid? Am I going to be a part of one of those cuts?
Exactly.
And this is again, people, important why we vote. So I'm just going to say that you have to make sure that you vote, and not voting is
Right.
voting. So I always have to say that.
Exactly. And I think the thing with adolescent mothers is, I mean, what category are they most likely going to fall into, right? Do they have a family support? Because adolescents have to rely on the family.
Yes.
Like there's not a six-figure corporate job at 14. It's just not going to happen. So it's kind of like, okay, well, in that case, we have to be extra holding of these young women because they don't have access to the same supports. A lot of young women, they're going to be relying on emergency services for healthcare. They don't have a primary care doctor, set up, an OBGYN, a doula. Oh my gosh, no. Like those are not things that are going to be within their ecosystem. So I think they're already, unfortunately, at risk for mental health challenges.
No, definitely. And then it could like even going deeper into what that family structure looks like. Okay, well, is she a foster child?
Right.
Is she adopted? Right?
Yeah.
Is she a runaway? Those are, major things that I feel like are really going to play a part into, okay, how is this child going to then grow up?
Hmm. Hmm.
Because even if she's adopted, okay, well, what does
Yeah.
that family support look like? Is
Yeah.
she really a part of the family? Or is she outcasted? So,
Exactly.
and is she going to have, much time to be with them? Are they willing to take on another family member, a
Right.
child in their family because they were already
Yeah.
taking on you, you know,
Yeah.
and
No,
you
it's
want
definitely a
to,
thing.
yeah. So it's very, it's tough. Um, and then
Yeah.
also, yeah.
I was gonna say the other thing too is, there is like a adultification process that happens when a young woman becomes a mother, becomes pregnant. So you can be 14, 15, 16 years old, and you're a child, and then all of a sudden you get pregnant, and it's like, okay, you're a woman now.
Mm.
And so I think a lot of those supports that we would normally give a youth, a lot of that empathy that we would give a youth, are then stripped away from them as well. Because it's like, well, you got yourself into this, you must be grown now. And it's sad to say it, it's sad to hear it even come out of my mouth, but I think that that's the way that society unfortunately looks at these young mothers.
No, it's true. It is true.
Yeah.
And then unfortunately them having to grow up more quicker than their peers and
Right.
miss out on certain things. So you might not be able to participate in going to regular school. You might have to do online school now just so you can
Yeah.
graduate quicker, or just go get a GED and then try to go to college and speed up the process. And
Mm-hmm.
hard
Mm-hmm.
because essentially you cannot speed up that process.
Exactly.
Set it up by having a child and not doing it the way that society would normalize to do it, right? You wait until maybe your 30s or
Sure.
something, and then you would do it then, but you did it now.
Yeah.
So now
Right.
you have to fill in the missing gap,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Because here's your 30s over here, and you're 15, right?
Yeah.
But there's all these life events that should have occurred in the midst did not happen.
Exactly.
You don't own a home. You don't know what that looks like. You don't have a degree. You haven't worked at in a corporate, your first corporate job yet, so you don't know how to navigate that. So there's a
Yeah.
gap there. How do I communicate with my boss, right? How do I communicate with my supervisor that's in the middle of my boss?
Right. Right.
Chain of command. There's so many different things that you don't know and how to navigate, and yet now you have this child, and you need to compensate for that missed time.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, and then there's a lack of mentorship.
Mm.
You don't have proper mentorship, or like you said, resources, access to um, educational tools that could help you
Exactly. Oh
along
my gosh, yes.
in the midst of what you should have, you would have learned.
Right.
But now you have to, okay, how can I get a job, that will pay me well? But wait, I only have my high school diploma.
Right. Right.
How am I going
Exactly.
to do that? I can't make six figures with that, you know? So
Hmm.
folks, even with a bachelor's or master's and a doctorate degree, are trying to even strive for that, you
We're
know?
trying.
Yeah, yeah. So, and then it's like you have this baby, which in reality, you need to be making over six figures to support a well lifestyle. If you're doing it on your own, you don't have
Right.
support, you don't have a partner, because 9 times out of 10, there's not a partner there, so they're a
Right.
single mother. Um, so no, I really appreciate that perspective that you had on that.
Absolutely.
And then also in your view, so how can clinicians, educators, and community leaders better identify to respond to short-term suicide risk in culturally responsive ways?
Yeah, yeah. I think it goes back to, one of the things that I've learned through the task sharing model that we do in Harlem. So when I'm training those paraprofessionals in mental health, the key ingredient still to providing intervention successfully, it's like, yes, you want to have the skill base, but it's really that empathy, that connection, that trust, that non-judgmental attitude that is going to get someone to connect with you and it's going to make someone feel supported. And a person, there is something really beautiful that happens to a person when they feel supported and cared for. And I think that unfortunately, as we just talked about and how you beautifully laid it out, young Black mothers don't feel supported. There is a psychological neglect, there's an emotional neglect, a systemic neglect that happens with these young mothers. And so when it comes to being culturally responsive, I still think that key ingredient is going to be that support and that empathy. So being able to understand, okay, now we have all this knowledge of all of the systemic barriers, all of the disparities that exist within um, Black motherhood and pregnancy and teen pregnancy. How can we then look at this woman or this young woman empathetically and provide support and care? They just want someone to be there with them, someone to say, I don't have all the answers right now, but I'm going to be with you every step of the way. I'm here for you. I believe in you. Those are the small, small, very simple things that we can offer. But unfortunately, a lot of these girls never hear that or they've heard it before and then the person doesn't follow through. This could be even worse. So when it comes to supporting, like, when it comes to addressing, I should say, suicide risk in Black girls and young women, especially young mothers, it really is that key ingredient is support. Support, emotionally and relationally. Support through groups is another thing. So we know that teens, when they're able to be with people who are like-minded or who have gone through similar experiences, whether it be through a group or a mentorship type of, relationship, that can play a huge, huge role. So being able to connect them in some kind of way. Sometimes support can even look like, hey, I found this TikTok account and this girl is exactly like me. And, she had a baby at 16 and she talks about her struggles and look at her now, right? So being able to provide support even in that way, if we can't find it through our communities. So I think those are some pretty simple ways that we can provide care in a way that's culturally responsive.
No, I agree with that. And I think also too, like, what a lot of folks don't understand is what are some of those issues that they're dealing with on a daily basis.
Yeah,
So like if it's a young mom and it's coming to Christmas time, right? She might
yeah,
not have the funds to afford to get her children or her child any gifts. So now she's trying to find a nonprofit to get sponsored, for her children so she can have some gifts to put, under the Christmas tree or just put in an area for them and hoping that they pick her.
yeah,
Because that it's like a lottery system.
yeah,
And then if you
yeah,
get picked, then you're waiting in a very, 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 very long line that's wrapping around buildings in the cold, you know,
yeah.
just so, and she's doing it. She's making sure her hands are warm and make sure that her child has a gift for Christmas. So it's like, I think that there is a gap in understanding what they're truly going through and what they're fighting for on a daily. And like you said, that support, whether it's seeing another young mother and her struggles, because that story is a struggle.
Right,
Hoping
right.
that you pick my child,
Yeah,
even if
yeah,
it's one gift, at least they have
exactly.
to unwrap. Um,
Right,
and
right.
it, and I think a lot of people take a lot of that for granted that they have those wonderful experiences because they are trying to also curate that for their kids as well. But
Right.
there's a gap. There's
Yeah.
a gap in support.
And like you said, I mean, even in that example, right? This is a young mother in our hypothetical that has reached out to a nonprofit. I think, where the suicide risk and depression risk layer, people who are not able to reach out yet, right? You see them kind of struggling in silence, and that is a huge part of it. So if you have, if there's a woman that you know of, a young woman, a young mother, um, that needs those supports but isn't yet asking for it, right? Being able to supply those and identify those proactively is going to be huge.
No, it really is in getting them to that point that they're saying, okay, I will ask for help.
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
I know I need help. I know that I need this, gift for my child. So
Hmm.
I'm going to seek. And that's the main thing is okay, seeking and finding.
Right.
So, and saying it's okay, I need the help. I'm going to take it because it's just for right now. It's just for a season. It's not
Right.
forever, you know. Same with if you're in need of assistance, any type of assistance,
Hmm.
whether that's financial, if that's that you need to go to a diaper bank, if you need, there's free crib programs,
Hmm. Hmm.
other educational resources through nonprofits just to gain that knowledge, saying, okay, I
Right.
want to take a better step. Parenting classes.
Yeah.
There's
Which is
many,
so hard because it's like I
yeah.
didn't know any of this existed when I was 15, 16, 17 years old. I'm finding out about this stuff now and I'm in my
Mhm.
20s. Like I'm just trying to like just trying to figure it out for myself. I can't imagine what it's like as an adolescent young girl who's navigating this alone. So I think that's really where, adults we have to step up if we see a young woman in this position. I think it is on us as a community of care to then, surround her and bring her up to where, we can provide those supports.
No, it's really critical. And like you said, like even as adults, we don't even know. Like when we get put in a position where now, okay, we're creating our own family. Okay, well, I need this, I need that. I didn't even know I needed this
Right.
child. Like, what do I,
Exactly.
it's a baby. I don't even know. Oh, what do I do with the baby?
I think it was like last year that I found out. I'm like, oh yeah, a baby does need a car seat to leave the hospital. Like I was just like, wait, duh. But
Yeah.
it's not something you think about. And it's definitely not something I was thinking about, 10 years ago.
No, especially at you know, even at 15, and I've spoke to older adults and was having the same conversation about safe practices for sleep, because we do a lot of that work here at the nonprofit,
Oh, nice. Yeah.
safety for car seats. And
Hmm.
and now I'm talking about like our grandparents' age, because that was a way different time.
Oh,
They
yes.
were very shocked what the car seat looked like. They said, no, that's not a car seat. I said, yes, this is a car seat, and this is what the baby goes. No, 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 no. We put the baby in a basket.
Yep.
Okay.
If that, right?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
if baby goes on mom's lap.
Yeah.
That.
I said, wow. Okay. So I said, what type of basket are we talking about? An apple basket.
Yep. Pick
I
them
said,
up.
"What?" And we placed them in the car in that basket. That is a car seat. And so it's just really interesting to see how times have shifted and changed throughout
Yeah.
history. Um, and knowing that that is not safe, we will not.
Right, exactly.
Um, so like also too, as an implementation science fellow, your focus is on turning evidence into real world change. So what are some of the biggest challenges to implementing equitable, trauma-informed mental health programs in schools or community settings?
Oh, yeah. I mean, such a timely question because this is what we deal with. So basically, I can get into the weeds of it, but part of my job is to evaluate the effectiveness of the actual intervention, right? So we measure that using the PHQ-9 and the GAD-7, which are um, tools that you can use to assess for anxiety and depressive symptoms. So we see, every 2 weeks, like, is their score going down after getting this curriculum delivered? So that's how we assess for the effectiveness of the actual curriculum. The other thing that we are assessing for is the implementation of the curriculum. What barriers exist to getting that curriculum out into the real world? And let me tell you, there are a lot of barriers. So many. A huge one being when a mental health, the way mental health works, the way mental health care works is very much still in a medical model, which means there are so many forms. You have the intake, you have a risk assessment, you have documentation of, like what was talked about in the session. You have to follow up with these screeners. Okay, all of that takes, say, an hour to do or so. People in the real world do not have an hour just to fill out forms. So that is one of the huge, like one of the biggest things that is such a barrier is just the way that evidence-based practice works does not translate to a homeless shelter. We don't have, one, the capacity, for someone to be able to administer all these forms to a person walking in the door. Also, don't have the person walking in doesn't have the time for that or the mind space for that. They need help immediately. A lot of times, mental health care, including, some of the interventions that are coming out that are evidence-based, they still aren't looking at a person that might not have their basic needs met. So someone who is at a homeless shelter does not have housing, right? And if we think about social determinants of health or mental health, if we think about even Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's like, okay, we need to address that first. And I think that a lot of models aren't built to, address those sorts of barriers to care. So I think that those are just some of the many barriers we have with implementation. The other thing being like, in mental health care, we say, okay, for it to be evidence-based, it needs to be administered by a professional in a quiet, private space. That does not exist in a homeless shelter. That does not exist in a community-based organization where a lot of the organizations we work with, they are doing coat drives out in the street. They are handing out chicken sandwiches to people who are hungry, right? So we don't have evidence-based practices to be able to, talk to those people who are just out and about in their everyday lives. So I think that's a lot of what we're trying to address. But I think that there is a huge gap between what we think of as mental health like therapy and practice, and then what people are actually, able to retain and do who are just on the street or out and about.
No, definitely. And I think it's like really important, like you said, to support. I
Yeah.
think it always like ties back into support.
It does. It does. And I think like, in mental health, it's like, we do have fancy interventions that we've developed, things that are evidence-based. And what evidence-based means is that this has been a program that's been tested, that's been evaluated, and we see measures and outcomes that, improve mental well-being on some sort of measure, right? But what can not be as quantified is, that basic support that you might offer someone, and like simple things too, like holding the door open for somebody after they've had a rough day, right? Or paying for somebody's lunch when they didn't expect it, or shielding someone. And I'm in New York, so when there's like rain and you just take your umbrella and you put it over like an older woman, right? Like there's such small little things that actually really will temporarily improve someone's mood, and their mental health, at least in that moment.
No, definitely. And like you said, like just little things. And you never know, that will change someone's whole day.
Oh
You
yeah.
could have had and you might not, and it's okay if you don't even know that person.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So, like also to tie in too, if you could redesign one part of your current mental health care system to better support young mothers of color, what would it be and why?
Hmm. Ooh, it's tough. I think a lot of it is like in the schools. If you think about it, like, young people, I mean, they spend the majority of their day at school. That is where their lives are taking place. Yet, I know when I was growing up, we had one psychologist that was shared, I think, for the county. Wasn't the school. It was like a psychologist. And I was never identified as someone who was struggling, even though I was, right? They saw my grades. They said, oh, it looks good enough, and I didn't on paper present as someone who was going through depression or had anxiety, even though a lot of my perfectionism was really fueled by that. So I think that if I could redesign, it would be having more embedded supports within the schools over time. It's been a long time since I was in middle school. So over time, that's gotten a lot better. Like, I'll say some of the teens that I provide therapy to now, they're talking to me and they're like, oh, yeah, today during health class, we talked about schizophrenia. I'm like, wait, what? You did? So I would say it's becoming more commonplace now, but it's like, okay, psychoeducation is one piece of it. Now, can we get actual therapeutic supports embedded within schools? Can we make sure that every teacher is trained on mental health first aid? Can we make sure that students are going through a social emotional learning curriculum, right? Or a developmental curriculum? There is a wonderful researcher. Her name is Dr. Athan at Teachers College, Columbia University, and she studies reproductive identity, which is so interesting to me because she says that reproductive identity, it doesn't start when, a girl gets pregnant. It starts when, you become aware that, a family is something that you may or may not want in life. So a lot of times that's when you're playing house at like 5 years old, right? So she says, we need to be having discussions, not just about, like letting your kid play house and, oh, that's so cute, but it's asking them actual questions. Like, do you want a baby? What is it like for you to care for the baby? Do you like that? Do you see yourself with a like a partner in the home one day? And it's silly questions to ask like a 5-year-old and a 6-year-old, but it's priming them to really think about their identity as a reproductive being, as a sexual being, which is controversial, but it's something that's going to happen regardless. So I know I said a lot. I said the schools, I'm talking about reproductive identity, but it's really just having that psychoeducation embedded in the schools, and at a younger age.
No, I agree. I think it's important that we start in the schools, because that's where they're spending most of their time
Yeah.
day. And it doesn't take that much to put that in there. And I think it's important that schools are also partnering with local organizations as well that are already doing that work. Because if it's like, okay, well, we
Right?
don't want to hire someone to do it, well, there are agencies out there in your own community that will do that work. So that
So
was
many.
that was going to tie into my next question for you. How can organizations like Angels Protection play a role in closing the equity gap and advocating for better mental health policies?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, what I love about community-based organizations, what I love about my work is that, like you said, these organizations are already doing the work. And most importantly, community-based organizations have trust within the community, whereas me coming from an academic institution, that trust is not there. A lot of people either don't trust or just don't know about academic institutions. They are this fancy high in the sky thing that has likely taken over property within a community that could have used that property, right, and those resources. So I think that community-based organizations are well positioned within the community, having a trusting relationship and having, personnel to be able to support these people who are coming into their doors. So that's one thing that I just think, okay, you're trusted within the community. The other thing you can do is you can put on programs that are geared towards mental health and well-being. You can invite speakers. You can put out social media posts. People are looking at social media a lot more than they're walking into our clinic doors, right? Putting out social media posts that just have the facts listed on them, right? And that have, resource guides of where people can seek help. You can also, I mean, you don't have to be a qualified mental health professional necessarily to ask questions about depression and anxiety. You just have to know how to link them to care, right? So it's like, oh, if you've been feeling down lately, there's this clinic down the road that really can help support that, and they're free or low cost, right? So like having an inventory of resources that you can draw upon is another thing. The last thing I would say is, getting, or not getting, but applying for grants that can really support the infrastructure of your organization. Harlem Strong is where, I work, is the name of the program that I work for. And we partner with organizations because there's a grant, there's money and funding for them to be able to get this training and then deliver it to the people that walk in their doors. So I say there's a lot of grants out there from foundations, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, Gates Foundation, Welcome Trust. There's WT Grant Foundation. There's so many out there now that are very interested in funding these opportunities for community-based organizations to expand their psychoeducation and mental health care. So I think that that's another way that organizations can definitely help bridge that gap is by getting some funding for it and getting the training.
No, I agree. And partnering with academic institutions, I know that like here at Angels Protection, we just recently built a research team,
Nice.
and which is another blessing that I'm able to see that flourish as well out too.
Yeah.
But also partnering with those academic institutions to make that work happen,
Yes.
I think is very important. And using your resources, like you said, creating different like social media posts, putting out information, resource guides, um, because everybody's on social media constantly,
Oh,
24/7.
yes.
So,
Yeah, exactly.
you'll see it pop up on your timeline. I'll be like, oh wow, that's a self-care strategy that I could use.
Right.
Oh, I actually do need to be drinking more water. Like it's like small things that most people don't think about.
Exactly.
So also too, what does healing look like for young mothers navigating both motherhood and trauma?
Healing. I think it's such a word that is so self-defined, right? Because only you know your trauma and only you know your story, right? I think for me, healing, and I would just talk even personally, but also what I see as, a clinician, is when you are finally able to accept and love yourself, right? Instead of beating yourself up, instead of saying, I should do this or I should be this, right? A lot of self-love, because that's the thing that I think people lack when it comes to trauma. I think that's the thing that trauma does to the body. It does to the mind is it takes away that sense of love and grace for oneself, right? And it distance you from yourself in a way. So I think when people kind of come back home to themselves, when they start to love themselves, when they start to see themselves as human again, right? That's what healing really looks like. And so I think that there are a lot of things we can do to support that healing, right? By getting the access to resources, by having a supportive, social supports and things like that. But it really is, for me, the biggest indicator of whether someone is healing or not is really that grace and that compassion that they're able to then extend to themselves. And only they're going to know that. But a lot of times, it comes through as being less anxious, less agitated, being able to cope with stress, being able to have the self-efficacy that says, hey, this situation is stressful, but I know I can get through it because I believe in myself. Right. So there are those types of smaller indicators that we can look at. But I think it's such a personal journey, healing. People have gone through such horrible, horrific things, right? And you're like, how in the world did you ever like grow from that? How did you get past that? And they're like, I don't know if I got past it, but I can love myself through it. And that's really the healing part.
No, I agree. And like you said, like just navigating to be able to heal
Right.
is really important and critical when we're talking about these young mothers. And then also too, like what gives you hope when you think about the future of Black maternal mental health and suicide prevention?
What gives me hope is I am seeing it being talked about. I think 10 years ago, these were not conversations that were being had. They're still not being had on the level that I would like them to be had. But I know that when I'm scrolling through on social media, I'm seeing more women being vulnerable about their own stories. I am seeing more advocacy and policy. Academics are, kind of jumping on the bandwagon of saying, hey, this is important to research. And when academics get on a bandwagon and they start to produce research, that research can then affect policy and change. So that's some of the work that's being done as well. PMADS is now becoming common knowledge. There are now courses that people can take within psychology programs that didn't exist before that are specifically geared around maternal health or reproductive health and well-being. So those are things that just it wasn't a thing. We used to say maternal like psychology, which is still a thing, but reproductive psychology is becoming more of a term because it affects everyone, regardless of gender identity as well. So that's another thing that I think has been giving me hope is like, okay, this is really expanding now. This is good to see just because the conversation now globally is finally being centered around Black women's experiences. So that does give me hope. I do think, though, there's a lot of sadness that still exists within that hope, right? There's still, when we look at the rates, they're not getting better. There's knowledge that's being produced about these inequities, but they're still persisting. And so my hope comes from the fact that there are people who want to address it and that are working to address it, but it exists in a contained way because I see it happening to a lot of young mothers and it's still heartbreaking. So I have hope, but it's sometimes it's a stifled hope.
No, but I think that, like you said, like having more of these high level conversations around the topic helps to push and bring awareness. Um, and and like I said, I'm seeing a lot of policy work being done around it too by
Yeah,
amazing, incredible women in the field, whether it's academic, policy, prevention, nonprofit work, government work.
yeah,
I definitely am seeing the needle being moved. And it takes some time, but I think when we're all working together towards the same common goal in our retrospective fields, it's pushing along faster.
right, right,
Um,
absolutely.
so more than like you said in the past, it was not being done to
That's
this.
the thing. Yeah, that's the growth of it, right? So it's like, okay, I can look and say 10 years ago, this was not a thing. But now I have, my mom is talking about it, right? And so it's like, okay, I think when it's reaching the ground, reaching people who are outside of our academic bubbles, and you see like regular schmegular people talking about it just out and about or online or on social media, like that's exciting because that means that this is now having a broader reach, that our work that we do in these academic institutions, at these community-based organizations and nonprofits is getting filtered into the community.
No, I really agree with that. And it's pushing forward, and I'm grateful to see it. I'm
Yeah.
grateful that we have amazing women in the field like yourself doing this exceptional
Oh,
work
thank
every
you.
single day, every day, um, working towards, bridging that gap. Um, and also, like, finally, if a young mother listening today feels hopeless or unseen, what words would you want her to hear from you?
Oh man, that she matters. That this is a moment in time that is deeply frustrating and challenging, but that she will get through it, and that this part of her story is just a chapter and it's going to continue to unfold in ways that are so beautiful and unimaginable, probably in the position that she's at right now. Um, I think that's something that happens, wisdom, I guess you would call it, as you grow older. It's hard to see past certain moments of time where you felt like there was no way out. But then you look back and you're like, I did that. I don't know what it was. I guess it must have been me, must have been God, must have been, whoever. I got through that. And I think that when you are an adolescent, it's especially hard to see past that. And when you're an adolescent mother, it can feel so encapsulating, so heavy. But soon that weight will be lifted. And so I think, you know, keeping the hope and that there are people out here that support you, that believe in you, that want you to share your story, that believe that you matter. So I think that the world is a really big place. And I think that's hard to see when you're young. So those are some things that I would offer.
I love that. No, and it's very needed. It is needed. And like you said, the world is a very big place, but there are so many opportunities. And even if you're going through something that seems so hard and tough in this moment in time, that you will get through it.
Right.
You will get through it, and there are resources out here to support you. And like that to say, I just want to say thank you so much, Dr. Brianna A. Baker, for your wisdom and decades of
Thank
service.
you.
Because
Thank you so much.
I just appreciate that so much, and being able to hear from you today. Because conversations like this, it moves us one step closer to building systems that truly honor, support, and protect young women and mothers of color. And if you're listening and feel moved to take action, visit angelsprotection.org to learn more about our projects and programs for mental health outreach and harm reduction, to our upcoming projects and programs for the 2026 to 2027 year, launching for our young women aged 13 to 20. And then also remember, silence protects systems, not people. So let's keep working it together. Thank you so much.
Thank you.